The Skyview Towers was the epitome of luxury in Manhattan, a sleek, towering structure of glass and steel that commanded attention from every angle. It was a place where the wealthy and powerful resided, a sanctuary of opulence amidst the chaos of the city. The building was known not just for its breathtaking views, but also for its state-of-the-art amenities, which included a gym, a private cinema, and of course, a sophisticated elevator system designed to transport residents swiftly and smoothly to their lofty homes. Jonathan Blake and his wife, Emily, had recently moved into the penthouse suite on the 35th floor. For them, this move symbolized the culmination of years of hard work and success. The spacious apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern design, was everything they had ever dreamed of. But despite the allure of their new home, there was an unease that neither of them could quite shake. It started subtly. Jonathan, a man of routine, began to notice that the elevator seemed to behave strangely whenever he used it alone. At first, it was small, almost unnoticeable anomalies, brief moments of hesitation before the doors closed, or the lights flickering for just a split second. But these oddities soon became more pronounced. The elevator would suddenly lurch to a stop between floors, leaving Jonathan in a state of suspended anxiety, heart pounding as he waited for it to resume. He would feel a chill in the air, an unnatural cold that seeped into his bones, as if the very atmosphere inside the cabin had shifted. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Jonathan entered the elevator, pressing the button for the 35th floor. As the doors slid shut, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread, though he couldn't explain why. The cabin began its ascent smoothly at first, but then, without warning, it stopped between the 12th and 13th floors. The lights dimmed, casting long, eerie shadows along the mirrored walls. Jonathan reached out to press the emergency button, but his hand froze mid-air when he saw something in the reflection, a faint outline, barely visible, standing just behind him. His breath caught in his throat as he turned around sharply, but there was no one there. The elevator was empty except for him, yet the reflection in the mirror had shown otherwise. His pulse raced as he faced the mirror again, this time seeing only his own pale face staring back at him. The lights flickered violently before the elevator resumed its journey, the momentary stoppage feeling like an eternity. When the doors finally opened on the 35th floor, Jonathan stepped out with a sense of relief, but also with a gnawing fear that something was terribly wrong. He didn't mention the incident to Emily, convincing himself it was just a trick of the mind, perhaps brought on by stress or exhaustion. But deep down, he knew there was something more to it. The building, for all its modern grandeur, held secrets, dark, disturbing secrets that were starting to seep into their lives. As days passed, Jonathan found himself increasingly avoiding the elevator, opting for the stairs whenever possible. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. The elevator would sometimes arrive at their floor without being summoned, its doors opening silently as if inviting him in. On other occasions, Emily mentioned hearing the faint sound of voices coming from the elevator shaft, voices that seemed to whisper unintelligible words in the dead of night. The unease that had begun as a mere whisper in the back of Jonathan's mind was growing louder, more insistent. The elevator was more than just a machine. It was a gateway to something unknown, something that existed beyond the sleek, polished surface of their new home. And as much as he tried to ignore it, the truth was becoming impossible to deny. They were not alone in Skyview Towers. Something, or someone, was there with them, and it was only a matter of time before it made itself known. The night of the gala had arrived, and the Skyview Towers was abuzz with activity. The building's lobby, usually a quiet haven of marble and soft lighting, was alive with the sounds of conversation and the clinking of champagne glasses. Jonathan and Emily were dressed to impress. Jonathan in a sharp black tuxedo, and Emily in an elegant evening gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. As they made their way to the elevator, Emily, always one for practicality, suggested taking the stairs to avoid the crowd. Jonathan hesitated. The memory of his previous encounter in the elevator still lingered in his mind, an unshakable feeling of dread that clung to him like a shadow. But he pushed it aside, smiling at Emily as he assured her he'd meet her downstairs. She kissed him lightly on the cheek and started towards the stairs, leaving Jonathan alone in front of the elevator. The doors opened almost immediately, as if the elevator had been waiting for him. Stepping inside, Jonathan felt a familiar chill settle over him, the temperature dropping noticeably as the doors closed behind him. He glanced at the control panel, his finger hovering over the button for the lobby, but something made him pause. The button seemed to glow faintly, casting an eerie light that flickered like a dying bulb. As the elevator began its descent, Jonathan's nerves started to fray. The familiar hum of the machinery felt different tonight, less a comforting sound of modern technology and more like the low growl of a predator stalking its prey. The soft music that usually played in the background was gone, replaced by an unsettling silence that pressed in on him from all sides. The elevator came to a sudden, jarring halt between the 12th and 13th floors. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat as the lights dimmed, leaving him bathed in a sickly, pale glow. He stared at the mirrored walls, his reflection distorted and stretched in the uneven light. And then, just as before he saw it, something else reflected in the glass, standing just behind him. It was a figure, barely there, a shadowy silhouette that seemed to pulse with malevolence. Jonathan's breath hitched in his throat as he spun around, expecting to see someone, or something, looming behind him. But the elevator was empty. No one was there, except he knew that wasn't true. The air grew colder still, and the walls of the elevator seemed to close in around him. He could feel it now, an oppressive presence that filled the small space, pressing down on him with an unbearable weight. The silence was shattered by a faint, distant sound, a voice, low and raspy, whispering his name. Jonathan. His name hung in the air, distorted and echoing, as if the voice came from far away, yet it was right next to his ear. Jonathan's hands shook as he reached for the emergency button, desperate to get out, to escape whatever was in there with him. But his finger never made contact. The lights flickered violently, plunging him into complete darkness. In the pitch black, the voice grew louder, more insistent. Jonathan, Jonathan. He could hear it all around him, coming from the walls, from the floor, from the very air he breathed. Panic surged through him, his pulse racing as he pounded on the doors, screaming for help. But there was no answer. The only sound was that voice, that horrible, disembodied voice, calling his name over and over. And then, with a soft ding, the lights came back on. The elevator lurched back to life, descending rapidly until it came to a smooth stop at the lobby. The doors slid open with their usual quiet efficiency, revealing the bright, bustling scene outside. Jonathan stumbled out, his legs weak, his heart still pounding in his chest. The lobby seemed almost surreal after what he had just experienced. The laughter and chatter of the other guests felt distant, like a world he was no longer part of. Emily was there, waiting for him with a concerned expression, but Jonathan could barely focus on her words. His mind was still trapped in that elevator, in the darkness, with that voice. He tried to brush it off, forcing a smile as he reassured her that he was fine, just a bit tired. But deep down, he knew it was a lie. Something had happened in that elevator, something that defied explanation. And as they made their way into the gala, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't over. The elevator had shown him a glimpse of something terrible, something lurking beneath the surface of their perfect new home. And he feared it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself fully. In the days following the incident in the elevator, Jonathan found himself unable to shake the overwhelming sense of dread that had taken hold of him. He moved through his daily routine like a man trapped in a nightmare, the edges of reality blurring with the fear that stalked him. He began to avoid the elevator entirely, opting to use the stairs no matter how many flights he had to climb. Emily noticed the change in him, the way he flinched at sudden noises or how his eyes seemed to constantly flicker towards the elevator, as if expecting it to open on its own. Concerned, she tried to talk to him, but Jonathan brushed off her worries, insisting that everything was fine. Yet, deep down, he knew something was terribly wrong. Unable to ignore the gnawing feeling that there was more to the elevator than just a malfunction, Jonathan decided to investigate the history of the building. Skyview Towers was a modern marvel, a symbol of luxury and architectural innovation. But every building had a past, and Jonathan was determined to uncover it. He started with a simple online search, but the results were mostly promotional, glossy brochures and articles praising the building's design and amenities. There was no mention of anything unusual, no whispers of ghost stories or urban legends. Frustrated but not deterred, Jonathan dug deeper, combing through city records and old newspaper archives. It was during one of these late-night research sessions, his eyes bloodshot and weary, that he stumbled upon something that made his blood run cold. Long before Skyview Towers had been erected, the site had been home to an old hotel called the Crestmore. The Crestmore had been a grand establishment in its time, a beacon of luxury in the early 20th century. But as the years passed, the hotel fell into disrepair, and its clientele grew more transient, more desperate. Then in 1933, during the height of the Great Depression, a fire broke out in the hotel. It started in the kitchen and quickly spread, consuming the old wooden structure in minutes. Dozens of people perished in the flames, their bodies never recovered. The hotel was left a charred ruin, and the land was eventually sold and redeveloped. First into a series of small businesses, and then, decades later, into the gleaming tower that now stood there. As Jonathan read through the accounts of the fire, he noticed a disturbing detail. The 13th floor of the hotel had been where the fire was most intense, trapping many of the guests and staff. It was said that the heat was so fierce that the steel beams warped and the walls melted. Some claimed to have heard screams echoing from the 13th floor for days after the fire had been extinguished, as if the souls of the dead were still trapped in the inferno. Jonathan's heart raced as he realized the significance of what he had found. The 13th floor of the Crestmore corresponded exactly with where the elevator had stopped during his harrowing experience. But Skyview Towers didn't have a 13th floor, not officially. Like many modern buildings, the 13th floor had been skipped in the numbering, considered bad luck. But Jonathan knew better now. The elevator had taken him to a place that wasn't supposed to exist, a place where the boundaries between the past and present had blurred, allowing the horrors of that tragic night to seep through. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, Jonathan decided to visit the city's archives in person. He spent hours poring over old blueprints and photographs of the hotel, each discovery deepening the sense of unease that clung to him. The more he learned, the more he realized that the fire had left a scar on the land, a wound that had never truly healed. The Crestmore might be gone, but its ghosts remained, trapped between worlds, seeking something they had lost. Jonathan also discovered that after the fire, strange reports began to surface. Sightings of ghostly figures in the charred remains of the hotel, unexplained cold spots, and most disturbingly, stories of a mysterious elevator that would appear out of nowhere, its doors opening to reveal nothing but darkness. Those who entered were never seen again. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they formed was terrifying. The elevator in Skyview Towers wasn't just a modern convenience. It was a conduit, a portal between the living and the dead. And somehow, Jonathan had crossed that threshold, touching a darkness that had been waiting for decades to be acknowledged. He returned home that evening, his mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. Emily was waiting for him, her concern deepening as she saw the haunted look in his eyes. He couldn't hide the truth from her any longer. Jonathan told her everything, the history of the Crestmore, the fire, the elevator. As he spoke, he could see the fear creeping into Emily's eyes, mirroring his own. But there was something else in her expression, too, a determination, a resolve. They couldn't ignore what was happening, couldn't pretend it was all in their heads. The building was haunted by the past, and whatever had taken root in the elevator wasn't going to rest until it was acknowledged. That night, as they lay in bed, the silence of the apartment was suffocating. Every creak, every distant sound seemed magnified, charged with the weight of the unseen. Jonathan and Emily held each other close, the reality of their situation pressing down on them like a physical force. The Skyview Towers was not the sanctuary they had hoped for. It was a place of horror, a monument to forgotten tragedies and restless spirits. And the elevator, with its gleaming panels and smooth operation, was nothing more than a facade, a doorway to a place where the living had no business treading. But they were in too deep now. The truth had been uncovered, and there was no going back. All they could do was wait and hope that whatever was haunting the elevator would remain confined to its steel cage, that it wouldn't reach out and drag them into the darkness that lay just beyond. The sleepless nights began to take their toll on Jonathan and Emily. Their once vibrant penthouse, with its sweeping views of the city skyline, now felt like a prison, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering no solace from the growing dread within their walls. The fear that had begun as a whisper in the back of Jonathan's mind had now become a constant, suffocating presence, hanging over them like a dark cloud. Every time the elevator doors slid open on their floor, they would both freeze, waiting for some unseen horror to step out. The anticipation was unbearable, fraying their nerves until they were both on the edge of collapse. Jonathan's research into the building's history continued obsessively. He was no longer searching for answers. He was searching for a way out, a way to stop whatever had been awakened in the depths of Skyview Towers. But every new piece of information only deepened the mystery and intensified his fear. The fire at the Crestmore had been a tragedy, yes, but it was the stories that came after the fire that haunted him the most. Tales of people disappearing, of ghostly figures seen wandering the ruins, and of course, the stories of the elevator. Always the elevator. It was on one such night, when Jonathan was deep in his research, that Emily heard it first. She had been trying to distract herself, reading a book in the living room, while Jonathan sat hunched over his laptop. The sound was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a low, rhythmic creaking, like the sound of old wood bending under pressure. Emily frowned, looking up from her book. The sound was coming from the walls, from deep within the building itself. She stood up, her heart beginning to race as she listened more intently. The creaking grew louder, more pronounced, until it became clear what it was: the sound of the elevator moving. But it wasn't the usual smooth, mechanical hum. This was different, slower, more deliberate, as if the elevator was dragging itself through the building with great effort. "Jonathan," Emily's voice was shaky as she called out to him. He didn't respond, too engrossed in his research to notice the sound. She took a few hesitant steps toward the hallway, where the elevator shaft was located, and the sound grew louder still, reverberating through the walls. There was something deeply unsettling about it, something that sent a chill down her spine. It was as if the elevator was alive, moving of its own accord, driven by something that was not mechanical, but malevolent. Emily reached the hallway just as the elevator came to a stop on their floor. The creaking ceased, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. She stared at the closed doors, her breath catching in her throat. She knew she should turn away, go back to Jonathan, and pretend she hadn't heard anything. But she couldn't. She was drawn to the elevator, compelled by a force she couldn't explain. Slowly, she reached out, her hand trembling as she pressed the button to open the doors. They slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the interior of the elevator, empty, just as she had expected. But the air inside was different, thick and cold, as if it had been infused with something dark and ancient. The lights flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows across the mirrored walls. As Emily stood there, staring into the empty elevator, she felt a presence behind her, a sudden shift in the air that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She spun around, her heart pounding, but there was nothing there. Only the hallway, dimly lit and eerily quiet. Yet, she knew she wasn't alone. Something was there, watching her, waiting. She backed away from the elevator, her fear escalating as the doors began to close on their own. But just before they shut completely, she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help us!" Emily gasped, stumbling backward as the doors closed with a final, ominous thud. The whisper had been soft, almost pleading, but it was enough to send her running back to the living room. She found Jonathan still at his laptop, oblivious to what had just happened. She grabbed his arm, her voice trembling as she told him what she had heard. "Jonathan, There's something in the elevator. Something's trying to communicate with us." He looked up, startled by the urgency in her voice. "What do you mean? What did you hear?" "It had spoke to me," Emily stammered, still shaking. "It said, 'Help us.'" Jonathan's blood ran cold at her words. It confirmed what he had feared all along. The elevator wasn't just a portal for the spirits trapped in the building. It was a prison, holding them captive in a place between worlds. And now, they were reaching out, desperate for someone to free them from their torment. But how? How could they possibly help? The thought of entering that elevator again, of facing whatever horrors lay within, filled Jonathan with dread. Yet he knew they couldn't ignore it any longer. Whatever was happening in Skyview Towers was escalating, and if they didn't do something soon, they might never escape it. Together, they made a plan. Jonathan would go back to the archives the next day, looking for anything that might give them a clue on how to release the spirits. Emily, meanwhile, would try to contact a medium or a paranormal expert, someone who could guide them through whatever ritual or process was needed to set the spirits free. That night, as they lay in bed, the tension between them was palpable. They were stepping into the unknown, facing forces they couldn't comprehend, and the fear of what might happen was almost unbearable. But they had no choice. The spirits in the elevator were growing stronger, their presence more pronounced with each passing day. And if they didn't act soon, Jonathan and Emily feared that they too might become part of the haunted history of Skyview Towers, lost forever in the darkness that lay just beyond the elevator doors. The weight of their predicament pressed heavily on Jonathan and Emily as they embarked on their desperate quest to free themselves from the malevolent grip of Skyview Towers. Every night brought new fears, and each day deepened their resolve to uncover the truth and put an end to the relentless torment. Their once harmonious relationship now bore the strains of sleepless nights and constant anxiety, but their shared determination kept them united against the unseen forces that haunted them. Jonathan's subsequent visit to the archives proved fruitful, yet equally unsettling. Among the yellowed documents and brittle photographs, he discovered a series of letters written by the last manager of the Crestmore Hotel, Henry Caldwell. Caldwell's correspondences detailed his growing unease in the days leading up to the fire, mentioning strange occurrences and inexplicable phenomena that plagued the 13th floor. One letter, dated just days before the tragedy, spoke of an elevator that seemed to possess a will of its own, acting independently and drawing people into its depths. Realizing the significance of Caldwell's writings, Jonathan shared his findings with Emily. Together, they pieced together that the elevator was not merely a conduit, but perhaps a manifestation of the hotel's unresolved anguish and rage. The spirits trapped within sought acknowledgement and release, and the modern elevator system had inadvertently become the gateway for their suffering to bleed into the present. The trio convened in the penthouse, surrounded by research materials, photographs of the Crestmore Hotel, and notes detailing the elevator's behavior. Samuel explained that to sever the connection between the two dimensions, they would need to perform a ritual of acknowledgement and release. This would involve confronting the spirits directly, validating their suffering, and guiding them towards peace. However, Samuel warned that the process would not be easy. The spirits were deeply entrenched in their pain and anger, and resistance was inevitable. On a moonless night, they prepared for the ritual. The penthouse was dimly lit, candles casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. Samuel arranged protective symbols around the room and placed a circle of salt to create a barrier against malevolent forces. Jonathan and Emily, though terrified, steeled themselves for what was to come. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew thick with tension. The temperature plummeted, and an oppressive silence enveloped the space. Samuel began the incantation, his voice steady and commanding. He called out to the spirits, acknowledging their suffering and urging them to find peace. The air seemed to vibrate with unseen energy, and the room darkened as the veil between the worlds thinned. Suddenly, the elevator doors on their floor began to open slowly, the familiar chime echoing ominously through the hallway. A cold draft swept into the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. From the shadows, the figures of the trapped souls began to materialize, ghostly apparitions with hollow eyes and anguished expressions. Their presence was suffocating, their sorrow palpable. One spirit, a woman dressed in tattered clothing, stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto Emily's, and a deep sorrow emanated from her being. Samuel continued the ritual, speaking directly to her, acknowledging her pain and promising to help release her from her eternal torment. Emily felt an inexplicable connection to the spirit, as if understanding her suffering on a visceral level. Another spirit, a man with singed hair and burnt flesh, moved towards Jonathan. His voice, a haunting whisper, echoed in Jonathan's mind, recounting the horrors of the fire and the despair of being trapped in a perpetual nightmare. Jonathan, tears welling in his eyes, reached out as if to comfort the tormented soul, conveying empathy and a desire to help. As the ritual progressed, the spirit's anger and fear began to wane, replaced by a fragile hope. Samuel intensified his efforts, his voice rising in a crescendo of invocation. The room trembled as the barriers between dimensions began to dissolve, the spirit's forms becoming more transparent, their presence less oppressive. But just as it seemed the ritual was succeeding, a powerful force surged through the room. The elevator doors slammed shut violently, and the spirits recoiled, their sorrow morphing into rage once more. The air grew thick with malevolent energy, and the temperature soared. The spirits surged towards them, their wails filling the penthouse with a cacophony of anguish and fury. Samuel, undeterred, intensified his chant, urging the spirits to let go and find peace. Jonathan and Emily, summoning every ounce of courage, joined in, their voices blending with Samuel's in a harmonious plea for release. The combined strength of their conviction began to overpower the darkness, the spirits' forms flickering and wavering. In a final, desperate push, Samuel called upon the spirits to acknowledge their pain and accept the path to peace. The apparitions hesitated, their anguished expressions softening as the promise of release resonated within them. One by one, the spirits began to fade, their forms dissolving into shimmering light that ascended towards the ceiling, dissipating into the night. The elevator doors, now glowing with a gentle, ethereal light, opened one last time. A sense of calm washed over the room as the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene stillness. The spirits had been freed, their suffering acknowledged, and their tormented souls finally at peace. Exhausted but triumphant, Jonathan, Emily, and Samuel stood in the now quiet penthouse. The ritual had succeeded, and the malevolent presence that had plagued Skyview Towers was no more. The elevator, once a conduit for darkness, now functioned flawlessly, its doors opening to the familiar, bright lobby without a hint of the horrors that once lay within. As dawn broke over Manhattan, the first rays of sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a warm glow over the penthouse. Jonathan and Emily embraced, relief and gratitude evident in their eyes. They had faced the depths of fear and emerged victorious, their bond strengthened by the trials they had endured. Samuel, packing his equipment, offered a final piece of wisdom. Sometimes, the past reaches out to the present in ways we can't comprehend. But with courage and understanding, we can bridge the gap and bring peace to both worlds. With his departure, the Skyview Towers returned to its facade of luxury and modernity, but the memories of the harrowing ordeal lingered as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Jonathan and Emily, forever changed by their experiences, knew that they had not only survived but had also freed the tormented souls that had sought revenge. Their home was once again a sanctuary, a place where love and light had triumphed over darkness and despair. Yet, as they looked out over the city skyline, a lingering sense of vigilance remained. The echoes of the past had been silenced, but the lessons learned would forever guide them, reminding them that even in the most opulent and seemingly perfect places, shadows of history could linger, waiting to be acknowledged and healed.